and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George. Today we're going to speed paint a model kit that I hadn't even seen before, but it was sitting at my friendly local games store, yes, and I picked it up. Now it's a perfect time to do it. Which kit am I talking about? This guy. It's the Kroot Carnivore Squad? Yeah, Kroot Carnivore Squad. Before you ask, I have no idea why it's in this weird looking box. This is literally how I got it at the store. Apparently at the store, they actually print out a black and white image and put it on the box because underneath there, that's all there is. Apparently, that's how Games Workshop ships this box. Is it special in some way? I don't know. But let's open it up and find out. So, before we start digging into that Kroot Carnivore box, let me kind of catch you up with the story as it has transpired so far. This is the project that I was working on, the Star Pulse Cadre from Games Workshop from last December. I didn't order any new Christmas boxes this year because I went a different direction, but I still kind of had that deadline. I want to finish this before, before the end of the year. Technically, it was before the next. I got the next box set, or maybe before you order the next one. I don't know. Doesn't matter. But I'm happy to say I'm done. All that's in here are some decals and some flight bases that I didn't use. That doesn't actually mean I've finished with the box, because you'll notice something interesting. You've seen all of these videos except for one. This guy. This was actually the very first model from this box that I picked up, or that I started working on, and it was horrible. It was horrible. I don't know if it was all misaligned and gross out of the box, or if I, in my predictable lack of skill, messed it up as I was getting it along. But I actually painted it most of the way, so I got it based and washed. But as I was gluing stuff together, things didn't align, and I got super glue all over the thing, and I got so irritated. Are you ready for this? I threw it away. Don't tell anybody. It's like the cardinal sin for Games Workshop. But if you don't like a model, don't do it. Like, it's gonna kill your soul, and it's gonna sap your motivation. It's gonna sit there, and then you're gonna. All kinds of stuff happens. If you hate the model, just don't do it. Now, this doesn't mean that I'll never go back and get one of these, but on top of it not getting together the way I wanted it to go, I actually don't really like the model either. Like, it's too big for a Tau flyer. They have tiny little drones that float in the air. You have to tell me they have to have this rhino-sized thing to carry 2 people and a couple of drones? No! This should be the size of an Elder Grav bike. I think this is one of those missteps from Games Workshop, but it doesn't matter. That's fine, because instead of that one, I'm just going to build these guys. Let's open her up and see what's inside. Sprues. Bases. More bases. Why do I have so many bases? It's a lot of bases. So, I did a quick web search to see if I can find instructions for my Kroot Carnivore Squad, and it turns out there are no instructions. Apparently Games Workshop just didn't bother with these, which I guess is fine. Didn't have any data sheets, so I guess I'm just gonna wing it. And there seems to be a lot of different sprues here. I don't know what the deal is. There seems to be a lot happening for just a handful of models. But whatever, I'll figure it out, right? So I'm going to do the prep part and do the priming, and then we'll get back to business. Let's start clipping some sprues. Here are my Kroot boys, boys and girls. I'm not quite sure how Kroot, gender, sex, whatever, works, so I'm just going to call them my Kroot boys because reasons. The kits were fairly straightforward-ish to build. I do want to point out there are no instructions included in the box, and so you kind of just have to figure out what arms would go together. Now, because some of these arms come in pairs, like there's an arm and a gun, and there's one kind of arm that fits that combination because it has to reach the gun and the torso at the same time. There's a lot of models in the Warhammer 40k range that are like that, but those at least are numbered and have instructions. These do not, so you kind of have to mix and match and test until you figure it out, which is, I don't know that that's the worst way of doing it, but it's pretty close to that bottom. I don't know what decisions Games Workshop made in order for that to, like, for them to think that that was okay. But I think I've got it. I know I'm going to have trouble with some of the arms not reaching the torso, so I'm waiting for that. It's something that happened to me with Imperial Guard and with Space Marines, the Primaris specifically. Whenever there was two arms connected to a gun that also have to be connected to a torso, I've had problems. Less so with Tau recently, and less so with Imperial Guard the later few builds. So I'm hoping I have enough experience with these models to kind of help me kind of suss it out before I make major mistakes. I will say there's lots of leftover guns. It's almost like they had other plans for this kit, and I mean, so this, for example, this is one of the Kroot rifles, but it has no hands attached to it. I've seen this before with Imperial Guard and Tau and even Space Marines. Games Workshop will do this when the intent is for the rifle or the weapon to be kind of strapped onto the back, and so maybe that was the idea here, but you don't have any hands, any arms that have other stuff in them. Like, every arm is attached to a gun, or the only other difference is this one right here, right there. That one's attached to a combat knife. That's it. That's the only, option you have. So I'm thinking that they gave themselves room to maybe do other stuff with the Kroot, and then they just never did. Maybe they didn't sell well enough. Who knows? Okay, so I've got the prep done. There's a couple of things that are missing. Like, there's a couple of pouches or some shoulder pads. I'll get that on once I've got most of the model done. But I kind of want to manage this a bit because there's 18 different models here. And so I've got divided into two batches of 8. You see here I have a row of 8. These are primed already in a kind of a tan base coat, or a tan prime. And so I've gone ahead and primed the arms and weapon pairs that'll go with each torso. Since I've already glued the head on there, I did that because I knew I had to align the weapons a certain way. So I got the heads on in a way that makes sense with the heads. And so I need to keep the arms and the model together. Oh, I'm sorry. So you'll see here, for example, this model has its weapon and arm combo to the left. This one is here, this one is here. I need to keep them together until I'm ready to glue them. So that's something that I need to keep in mind. The other 8 I've done. I did a prime with black, and then I gave it some zenithal. Now, I've tried zenithal priming before, and it never really worked. I mean, I got the prime, but I just never got anything to happen with the model after I painted it. And so I think what I was doing wrong is that the zenithal is designed to provide maximum contrast between black and white if you use some other color than black and white. So say, for example, I've done gray and white. It doesn't work really well. I've done other colors in tan. Didn't really show up after the glaze base coat. So I'm hoping here that since I've done it this way, it's the black and white, I'm hoping that when I glaze the models, I'll be able to see some of the differences between the top and the bottom, to make this whole second pass with the primer worthwhile. But we'll see, right? Okay, so prep is done. I'm going to focus on the tan models first, and so I'm going to apply the base coat, and I'm going to do several different colors, but I'm going to get my wet palette, I'm going to break it out, get some paints pre-mixed so that I can start applying a base coat, and I will be back in a sec. Alright, I've got everything set up here so I can start basing. And I'm going to go with a few different varieties of brown for my basing. And I mixed up some varieties. So I've got basically I have these 3 varieties of brown. We have oak brown, we have leather brown, and we have monster brown. Now these are the same color, they're just kind of different tones. And professional or really good painters would tell you, you know what, all you need is one different color brown, and then you can always mix your, make darker and lighter. And that's absolutely true, but I'm not really sure how to do that. It's not really my thing. So, since I don't know how to make different browns, I'm just picking up a couple of different browns and making a base glaze out of them. And the reason I'm doing a couple of different browns is because I have, 16 models, and these guys aren't really they're not wearing armor. They're wearing their skin. Like this is an organic type of unit, and I think organic type units really need to have some variety in their skin tone, for lack of a better word. You don't want to have the same color unit. I mean, maybe you do for uniformity if that's what you're going for, but I think variety is a spice of life for these guys. Their skin isn't manufactured. It is a product of, biological processes. And at least on Earth, there's going to be a variability in tone. So I think it's entirely appropriate to do different color skin. So the basing on these guys is done. Doesn't look half bad. So now it's time to inject a little bit of color. And this is an optional stage if you want to add some variety to your troops. It's kind of an extra step, so it's not part of the speed painting process necessarily. You know, this is normally where I would layer on a different color for different parts of the armor, etc., etc. Instead, what I want to do here is to inject some color, and I'm going to do that by dry brushing. So instead of like layering on some highlights or whatever, I'm going to do some dry brushing to kind of give me a light extra bit of color. And since I want variability, I'm going to use these colors. So I've got Hydra Turquoise, Grimoire Purple, Goblin Green, and Barbarian Flesh. The idea here is that I want to make sure that each of these dudes is a little different from each other, right? So every biological organism, I don't know, the more advanced ones, right? They have variations in color across their species, and so that's kind of what I want to represent. But I don't want to make it an actual color. Like, I want to make it a kind of a gradual, almost like a blend. And I don't know how to blend. So that makes it tough. So instead of blending or layering highlights on here, which is a more advanced technique that I still haven't wrapped my head around, I'm going to try some dry brushing. So I've made a little mix of each of those colors. I'm going to add some to this cosmetics brush. Oh, wipe it down here, and I'll introduce that color kind of like so. Just some of those raised areas. So kind of the base of the model is still basically that brown that I chose, but there's a little bit of that purple tint across the model. So the dry brushing lets me keep the kind of the undercoat, the base color, while still kind of adding just a little bit of something. That's what that looks like. It's not bad. It's better than I expected. I'm going to go back here and hit these arms with the same technique. And I'll just repeat the process with each of these models, with each of these different colors. And I'm going to try different brushes just to kind of see how I like the results. You know, I'm learning how to do this. I want to give you a little close-up of how this dry brushing process kind of works out, and I've realized that some of my paints work really well for this and others don't, and you kind of just have to play it by ear to kind of figure out which which colors you want to do this with and how you want to approach it, what brushes you want to use, etc., etc. But the general idea is to give this kind of a light splash of color, and so that's what that looks like right there. And it contrasts with something like this guy, which is, you know, pretty blue looking, but you can still see the brown underneath. Oh, and don't forget to get the arms, because you don't want to do this later. And I'm including this in this process because while it's an extra step, it's really a pretty quick step. Well, here are my dudes, and they look kind of weird, I'm not gonna lie. But let's find out what they look like after this next step. This is the actual step that I would have taken in my speed painting. This is the normal second step in my usual speed painting process. It was pushed down a little bit for the dry brushing, and so it's wet washing, and I'm just gonna give it all a good wash. I want to bring back the browns that I had initially wanted for the model. So I'm going with a mid brown, I think it's what it's called. It's an Army Painter wash. And so I'm doing that over the dry brush in the hope that it integrates the base coat and the dry brush and the undercoat a little bit. And so I'm making sure that I control where the pooling happens, because I don't want really large puddles. I just want this stuff to pool in places that I want to be more brown or that are in shadow. So that's what it looks like. It's not bad. It'll lighten up in color a little bit as it dries. So I'll work on the rest of these models, and I hit it with the same color wash because I want the overall brownness to kind of be a unifying theme for my Kroot Carnivore Squad. So I've took care of the basing and washing now for all of the models, and so I have the first batch up here on my little crafting station, and I have the second batch right down here, and they look really similar, although this one right here, this is the one with the zenithal highlight, this is the one with just the straightforward tan primer. This one looks a little bit more dynamic. Let me get a closer shot. So they do look pretty similar, but I do feel anyway that this one is a little bit more, there's a little more something to it, and I think maybe the zenithal, maybe I have been doing it wrong. Maybe I do have to just go from extremes, and I think it helps now that I've got a better handle on how to get my paint to do some coverage on black primer. That was one of the things I was having trouble with, and I think I've made some progress with getting my mixes kind of where they need to be, and so now I don't have that much of a challenge getting the paint to go over a black primer. And as long as I'm using a glaze, you can kind of see some of the differences between the highlighted portions and the not highlighted portions, the stuff that's in shadow. And yeah, so it's a nice little mix, and I mean, I can't really line up all my models here next to each other because I am trying to keep track of what arms go to what torsos. But this should give you a sense for how they are subtly different, right? This applying the color with a dry brush and then washing over it, it really does. It gives us a vague sense of color while still giving us this uniformity, right? So they're both kind of brown, but this one has kind of a reddish tint, this one has kind of a greenish tint, and I really like the way they look. And it wasn't that much more effort than I normally put into it. So maybe this is something I need to add to my rotation. And maybe it only works really well with models like these that are natural, right? They're supposed to vary. But I don't know. I mean, maybe this is something I need to add to my routine for painting. So these look fairly similar right now. I mean, they're similar in that, they're all, kind of brownish, although, some of them have like a bluish tint, some of them have a reddish tint, and it's time to bring them together as part of a squad, part of a unit. And I'm going to accomplish this with the detailing phase. So right now you'll see it's fairly uniform in color. I mean, not uniform, but there's variations on browns and reds with some highlights there, but there's no real detail, right? So there's sashes, there's jewelry, there's little bone things, there's a little headdress I need to paint. And so this is where I'm going to start unifying them as part of a cohesive squad, right? So they're all fairly dissimilar right now with an overall brownish kind of theme, but adding the details and making those details uniform across the models, I think that's going to be where I bring them into a cohesive whole. So I need to figure out how I'm going to do that, and I think I'm going to add the accent color of my Tau army, the blue, and I'm going to give that blue to these leather kind of sashes. Rather than just kind of doing leather, I want to do something, I think that's where the color goes. So it's time for my detailing phase. I'm going to start off with this cloth. Thankfully, there's several different variations on this Kroot torso, and so that's going to give me a little bit of variety. So anywhere there's that leather-ish kind of sash, I'm just going to hit it with this blue. Alright, my Kroot now have this blue sash. It stands out quite a bit from the body, and it doesn't look like leather or cloth. It's just a splash of blue on there. So I want to bring it back down, and I'm going to do that with some of this guy. It's a soft tone. It's another wash from Army Painter. Just kind of go over it, and I picked this one because it has kind of a brownish tint, but it's kind of light, and so my hope is that it makes it look like leather or some kind of natural material. But it is going to change the color of the sash, and I'm not as happy about that, but we can deal with that later with a little dry brushing or some highlighting. Another detail that I want to pick out on these models are some of the bony parts. So I'm thinking about like the beak here, making that look bony. Same thing with these little this headdress, make them out to be like not like feathers but more like bones. There's a couple of details here on the legs that could be good to pick out as bone kind of protrusions. And finally, their abdomen has this like six-pack thing going on, and I think that could be picked out also as bone, like plates of bone that grow out. I could go with a different color, like maybe like a brown, to make sure that they look different from the kind of behind, the stuff that's behind, like the flesh. But I think that maybe if I use the same color as these bony parts, it'll kind of unify the appearance. So I've made a glaze of this skeleton bone. It's a little on the thin side, and I just kind of want to put it over those plates. Alright, here are my Kroot. They've got all the little bone armor patches on them, and so I'm going to wash that off with a little bit of soft tone. And I thinned it out just a little bit with some flow improver just to kind of make it nice and thin. And I went with this color because I want it to be, a little brown, but I don't want it to be extra dark. It's the same wash I used on the blue sash. So there's going to be a bit of the wash, but it's not going to be very pronounced. I still want most of that bone color to show up, but I do want it to kind of fill in some of those gaps, some of those little details, and bring back the brownness, the overall brownness of the model. The same thing to the headdress. I should point out that you kind of want to have some experience with your paints, especially these washes, since such a major component of the speed painting process. If you speed paint regularly, you will employ washes regularly, and they have different properties that you want to get to know. So this soft tone in particular, this dries quite a bit more lightly than you might expect after using any of the others. So I started using kind of more of it when I do use it, because it'll dry, and what it leaves behind is a lot more subtle than you expect. This next detailing step is just to bring a little bit more color to the quills back here. That's what I'm calling them, quills, kind of like a porcupine's quills. And so right now they're fairly brown, and I like that, but I feel like that could use a little bit of color. And so I have some choices to make, right? So I have one idea is to match the color of the quills to the color of the flesh, right? So that would be a little of that orc blood, dry brushed, and that probably would be okay, but I could also make it a different color, right? I could make it like if this guy would have green quills and the green dude would have violet quills. I think maybe that would work a little better, just to kind of add a little something extra. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my dry brush here, and it's going to be very, very light. So I'm going to get as much of this green off my dry brush, and I'm just going to rub it kind of here at the ends, kind of like so. And that's it. Yeah, I think I like the way that looks. So once again, I find myself at this part of the build that I knew was going to happen, but I was kind of hoping it wouldn't. So I'm attaching the arms to the model because, it's just down to the last few details and touches. Everything looks pretty good. But if you look at the arms, I was really careful. I did everything I was supposed to do, and I cannot get these models to just line up. I'm going to have to mess with these, and I hate messing with these because there's almost no winning. So this one isn't so bad. But I've got others that look like this. I'm going to have to mess with the wrist joint. And it's just such a pain in my behind. Anytime we have this kind of deal where two arms are connected to the weapon, this is kind of the stuff I can expect. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens all too frequently. And it's just, look at this guy. It's just unnecessary. It is just unnecessary. So I'm going to spend some time figuring this out, and it's going to ruin the paint job that I already have. But this is Warhammer 40K, guys. This is going to happen. Bah humbug. Let me figure this out. Alright, so I've got the arms on there. They're not perfect, but they're probably as good as I'm going to get. I added some green stuff, and then I've been touching them up a little bit to try to hide the gaps, but there's only so good that's going to get. Oh well. I think now is the time to add just a few more details, and there's not a whole lot left. I need to kind of add some metal to the gun. There's some bandana work, and there's a couple of little opportunities for color on the little spines. There's like little beadwork on those quills, and that should be about it. Rather than leave these silver thing, I'm gonna darken that up with a little dark wash. I was thinking about maybe rusting that up, but just because these guys are kind of an accessory species for the Tau Empire. I don't know that that means that they're, ramshackle. They're probably, they have a proud warrior tradition. So I'm just going to darken that up. I'm not going to rust it up, and make sure that the leather parts of the weapon show up as leather. So there's just a few little details I'm going to touch on. I won't describe all of them here, but I will show you the end results. So as I'm adding on the details, I'm, working on those little wristbands. I'm making them blue, just like the sashes. I've got a mind towards the end of this paint job. I've also painted the guns up. I've given these guys metal. I didn't do this for the Tau. I avoided all metals for my Tau. Almost all metals. But for the Kroot, I figured, they have a lower technological threshold, or whatever you want to call it. And so I did resort to metals here, thinking they're probably closer to human standards of technology versus Tau. Anyway, that's an aside point. So I'm working towards the end of this project, and I'm fairly happy with the results, even with that arm snafu. So I have to start planning on the basing. Now, there's a couple of things I should have done, right? So now that I'm thinking about it, I want to add some gravel to the solid, the place on the base that does not have a rock. So you'll see how every one of my models has this rock element, and it has kind of just the base on it, right? So there's two varieties. There's this one, and there's this one. So this one has a textured rock, I don't know, tile or whatever, but it's still like a rock element. So all my bases have this rock element and then like a flat area. And my initial plan was to add some texture paste to the ground around the rock, but I think, given how small the base is, I want to try something else. I'm going to gravel this up and then just paint over it and give it a wash. And that's something I should have done before I put the model on the base, or before I primed the model. But this job was a little more complicated because of stuff. I don't know. So I didn't do that, and so now I have to do it after the model is on there, which makes things a little harder. But now that I know what I want to do, I have a clear path forward. But in order for me to do this, I need to paint the rock element first. It's going to be a lot easier to paint the rock than it is to when it's not, when it's empty, than it is going to be to do it once the gravel is on there. So I'm going to paint the rocks. Once that dries, I'm going to add some glue, some wood glue or some Elmer's glue to the base, immerse it into some gravel or some sand or what have you, and that should take care of that. And I'll paint it, I'll wash it, I'll dry brush, and then the bases will be set. And by that time, the details on these models will also kind of be set. I thought I'd talk a little bit about this step. I intended to do this all off camera, but I thought it might be good to just talk a little bit about this. So these are some of those little accoutrements, some of those accessories that come in this kit, and they're really cool looking, but there's a lot of them. There's a ton of these things, and so it's going to take you a while. So this is a completely optional process, right? You can have your Kroot looking basically like this, and that's that. But for me, my personal view on this is that these little accessories, they add a lot to the model, especially when you use a painting scheme like I did, or at least it's a mix of techniques like I did, where it's still fairly minimalistic. So, there's very few details on here. There's some highlighting in shadows, but that comes from washing and dry brushing. It's not like really intentional. So these details, they add a lot of character, they add a lot of visual interest, and so for my dollar, they are worth the time that you put into it. But it is going to be a lot of time. So you'll notice how I paint them all separately. They're all in little sticks. And so, I prime them, I apply a base coat to them, and this step here is the wash. And so they look kind of neat. The wash hasn't dried yet, but it gives you an idea what it's going to look like at the end. Once that dries off, I'll go in and just dry brush some additional details like those bones. I'll make them a different color. Some of these have knives, so I'll add a black undercoat, and then I'll go back and add some kind of metallic color over it. The handle I'll do something else with. So there's a lot of steps applied to relatively few models, to very relatively small parts. And so there's a bunch more of these. These are all like guns and pouches and grenades and knives. These are all also, well, a lot of these are going to go on the model, right? So these go kind of on the back mounted kind of here. So they're kind of slung low. These can go on legs and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to paint all of these. Maybe not all of them will fit on the models, right? Because if some of them have like a backpack, maybe the side holster for a pistol won't work. But I'll have the option and I'll decide what to put on to which models once these things are painted. One of these accessories that absolutely will not work are these right here. These are little slabs of meat. My understanding is that these are Kroot trophies, like, hey, this is one of my hunts, and so I'm very proud of my hunt, and so this is a trophy, also a snack for later, possibly, I don't know. The problem with these, as interesting as they are, they don't have a really good attachment point. I could glue them onto the model, kind of like slung on the legs, and it would be fine, but they're attached by this hook. They're not attached by like this side. So if it was attached on, by the side, it would be different. But if I attach them just by the hooks, that's just going to be a thing that's going to fall off later. This is not enough of a contact point for anything meaningful. With even a little bit of handling, this thing is going to fall off. And that holds true for both varieties. They're kind of held up by a very thin contact point, a very tiny contact point. It's just not going to work, so I'm not going to do any of those. The same thing goes for all those slings. There's some slings that go on the rifles. You glue them on here, and they kind of swing over. Also, not going to work. I'm sure it'll glue just fine, but it's going to be one of those details that falls off immediately with just a little bit of handling. There's just such a small contact point. It's not going to work. It's going to be just a headache. So I'm going to skip them, and I recommend you skip them too. As a matter of fact, I looked online to see other people's examples of how they attach these meat trophies. The only one with these meat trophies is the picture from Games Workshop. Everyone else that I've seen omitted these, and I think we're all on the same page. These are just going to fall off immediately. So, something for you to consider. As I finish off these little bits, these accessory bits, I thought I'd show you what this impact is going to be. So, here is one of my Kroot models. Basically finished with the painting process. That's what he looks like. Looks pretty decent, right? Tabletop ready. Let me show you what he looks like with a few bits on his belt, so you can determine whether this is going to be a worthwhile investment of your time. And here is my little Kroot dude with his belt stuff. I didn't detail it fully, like the grenade and the steel plate. They're the same color, that little cord that hangs on there. I didn't pick that out. It was a lot of detail work, and it's not what I'm about, not usually. But I think he looks better with all that stuff on there, and I think it's worth the extra effort, but that's a personal decision that you're going to have to make. Here are my little Kroot boys, buddies, pals, all dressed up and ready to do Kroot things. There were quite a few little details that I want to point out. So there's this leather wrapping on all the rifles. They have different varieties of that wrapping. So I picked it out. I did a little bit of a wash to make it look more leathery, but it does kind of blend in to the Kroot hands. So for example here, you'll see that Kroot, the finger that's grabbing the rifle by the leather thing. It looks very, very similar to the leather, and that's because the base of the model is brown, and so a lot of it's brown. The color accent is only kind of dry brushed on, so a lot of the extremities didn't get that extra splash of color. I could go back there and kind of pick that out, but I think it's going to be all right. And I can't tell the difference really between the model that was zenithal primed and the model that was not zenithal primed. In fact, they were two very different kind of prime coats, and they look fairly similar. I guess this one's a little darker, and I can kind of tell if I look at the legs. If I look at the legs, there's a little bit more shadow on this one than there is here, so maybe there is something to the zenithal prime with the, assuming you have the black, the black prime with a zenithal over it. Maybe there is something to be said about that, but the difference is subtle, and I don't know how important it is. And maybe it's because I'm not doing it right, and I had seen someone else talk about how the zenithal prime really is just to help you pick out where the highlights are going to go. And since I don't do much highlighting, then that probably is what's happening here. The zenithal is just a guide to help you plan your subsequent painting layers, and I don't really do that. I do like the way they turned out. I mean, they're pretty cool looking, and even though they're different colors, they all kind of have this unified look. I mean, there's some green ones, there's some red ones, there's some blue ones, and if you look closely at the body, you can kind of tell. I mean, like this guy here, for example. He's pretty blue, but you don't really, I don't know, it's like I don't know, my eye doesn't go to the blue. I don't notice the blue as much as I notice the brown, and so compare these two together. When you look at them side by side, you can tell that they're different colors. But when you put them in a group like this, I think their overwhelming kind of color that I get out of it is brown, and there's splashes of blue color here that unify the squad. It's an interesting take. I think it looks very, fairly natural. These are largely biological organisms. They're not really wearing much armor or clothing even, so it looks fairly normal to me. But it might be that they're a little too brown. Maybe they're too close together. Maybe you'd want to see them stand out a little bit more. The red ones stand out more. The blue ones and the green ones stand out more. And so if that was something that you wanted to do, then absolutely go back and do some dry brushing or some manual highlights to kind of bring out the individual colors. But as a whole, I think they blend into a pretty good unit with a kind of a single identity, even though they're fairly different from each other. There's a couple of other details that you could do, like these really prominent Kroot faces. They lend themselves, I think, to some Kroot markings. Like I could go in here with a brush and kind of like splash on some red paint, like war paint. Maybe it's red, maybe it's blue, maybe it's purple. Maybe add some kind of designs for some additional character. And even at this stage, you could still do that if you wanted to. I'm going to skip it because I'm not really good at freehanding, and I'm liable to just make it look worse than it is. And this is a quick painting video, not a normal paint to the best of your ability video that you see in other channels. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I really like the little details on the quills, those little beads on there. I think that adds a nice little splash. You can barely see them, but But if you're looking for them, they're a nice little visual, a nice little element of visual interest if you're examining them pretty closely. So, closing notes. I've learned that you can make models look fairly similar even if you use different colors. It all just depends on how you use them. I unified all the different colors with a wash of brown, and so the unit's identity is fairly brown. Even their weapons and all that kind of, all the belt accoutrement, those are all brown. So the overwhelming sense you get of is kind of a brown earth tone with some splashes of color here and there, but even that splash is fairly muted, and I think it works well for this kind of model. That's my personal taste. You may have a different take on it, but feel free to build on these lessons and make these your own. I also learned that there's just sometimes that no matter what you do, no matter how careful you are, the arms are just not going to do what you want them to do. I kept track of the arms and made sure that I, mixed and matched. There is a little bit of doubt since the arms and none of the pieces were numbered in this kit because Games Workshop decided that this didn't need instructions or numbers to the different parts. So there is some possibility, right, that my approximation of the arms and weapon combinations were off by just enough to make this a gross task. I hid that as much as I could, and you'll notice that the shoulder pads are in different sides of the model. Some of them have it on the right shoulder, some of them have them on the left shoulder. I think they were designed so that they all go on the left shoulder, but I found that these would be very useful to hide the unsightly seams and joints underneath those pauldrons. So, maybe they foresaw that, or who knows. But it's fairly well hidden, but you can kind of tell if you look close enough. We also learned a bit about zenithal priming, and that it can make a difference even if it's a subtle one, and so it might be worth your while. That's a decision that's up to you. And for me personally, I don't know that I'll be doing it again, but I probably will, just because I'm a glutton for punishment, and I want to continue to experiment and improve my painting where I can. So it'll probably be a tool I break out every now and then when I think it might buy me something. But for the most part, I'm not sure that for my painting style, this quick painting style, I don't know that it buys you much. So there it is, my Kroot. These were my substitute for the Tau Flyer that I absolutely hated, ruined, and tossed in the garbage. I know it's sacrilege, but, it's a replacement kit, and I think it's a nice match. I don't know if they can actually be fielded with the Tau, or there's some kind of regiment rule. Who knows? Who cares? I probably won't play these for a very, very long time. It'll be a while before I get around to them. So thank you very much for watching. This has been Your Average Bear Gaming. I have been George. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.